Okay, so in the last video, we got set up actually getting our pages up and going here. What we want to be doing in this video is actually getting a real query, building a real page in our Gatsby default starter. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to that. Let's start by first heading into our node file. So if we head to our VS Code, let's get in here. And what we want to do is jump into this node Gatsby-node. Now this file is very interesting because this file is going to be a little complex if you've never used Gatsby, and if you have used Gatsby, it still might confuse you just a little bit. What we want to do in here is get into creating pages. Now, how you create pages in Gatsby is through this Gatsby node file that's run whenever Gatsby is reloaded. And this file is going to generate some of your pages on build. So if we do something, we need to do it a very specific way in here, and it can get a little confusing. So in this video, we're going to edit this file. We're going to get our pages up and running here, and they're going to be dynamically, statically generated. That's the word, dynamically, statically. No, they're going to be statically generated by the dynamic API that we have here. So let's dive headfirst into this file. The first thing we want to do is export.create pages. Okay, this is going to be what allows us to create pages in Gatsby, which we need to do. We need to create the pages on load based on the data coming in from the API. Next, we're going to say GraphQL, bound action creators. Okay, this is going to allow us to, again, create some pages. So again, if you want more descriptions on everything that's going on here, you're going to want to do so in the Pro Gatsby course. Now this is going to be an arrow function like this. Okay, let me move out the sidebar here so we can see the code nice and prominently. Okay, so we have our export to create pages, and it's going to be equal to a function that accepts or that is passed in GraphQL and bound action creators. Now at this page, we're going to want to grab const, and we're going to destructure a property or a value, which is create page without the S. Create page is going to be equal to bound action creators. So we're destructuring create page from bound action creators. If we were to type bound action creators dot create page, it would be the same thing as pulling this out here. Okay, so we have create page now here, and what we want to do is we want to return a new promise. And this promise is going to have an arrow function in here like this, where we have parentheses, resolve, reject. And this is going to be an arrow function. If you did the Pro Gatsby course, you could pretty much copy a lot of this code directly from your node.js file. Okay, now next, let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff up top here just to make this a little bit easy. Also, you'll notice my export is underlined. It needs to be exports, not export. I'm sorry about that one. You may have noticed that. Let's get my alignment correct here. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to run a GraphQL query. Okay, so we have this whole section. This is sort of just wrapper. And in here, we want a GraphQL. And this is going to be a function. Inside of this function, it's going to accept a GraphQL query, which we define by having backticks. I'm going to give this some space in here. So we have some backticks. And then we have some brackets. Now, inside of these brackets go any sort of query that we want to make. For instance, if we head back to our graphical, and let's say we wanted all of the pages where we had all WordPress page, right? Like this with edges, node, all this stuff. Let's go ahead and grab all of the pages. So we can do so by copying this entire little bit here that says all WordPress page up into the point where we get into all WordPress slide. Now from here, we're going to paste this in here just like this. Keep in mind, this is a string here. Okay, so check it out. What we want to do now is have access to the then of our promise. So if we scroll all the way down to where it gave this a semicolon here, we want to say dot then, and here we're going to get the result of our GraphQL query. So if we were to say then in here, we could say result, which is going to be an arrow function. Again, this stuff is a little tough if you haven't done it before. So again, I recommend that Pro Gatsby video. Watch this. You'll get a better handle on this file. or just copy the code from the code examples and pull it apart that way to make sure you're not making any mistakes. At this point, we're going to say if result.errors, then we're going to, let's console log out result.errors so we can see what those errors are, and we're going to want to reject. And that reject is a function that will accept result.errors as well. Okay, so we're gonna say, hey man, if this thing is messed up, stop it and log out what's going on. If it's not messed up, it's gonna get to here. Now here what we're gonna wanna do is actually use our results. So we could say result.data. Now this part is where it gets a little confusing. We want to grab all of the WordPress posts and their edges. So if we were to look at our graphical, you would see it's all WordPress page or all WordPress page edges, and edges are where the array is. So what we want to do is we want to get into this array. Okay, long story short, we want to get this array. And we can find that because the data is returned in the exact same shape as we request it. So the data is going to come in as data dot all WordPress page dot edges. Now from here we can do a for each. We're going to say, hey, give me each of those edges, destructure out each individual node like this. Okay, again, a little dense here. Okay, we're going to have simply just a set of brackets. Okay, so check it out. We're going to grab each of our WordPress edges, and then we're simply going to run create page. And create page is going to accept some things. For instance, it's going to accept a path. And this path is going to be node.slug. Now we're getting the slug again from our query where we have each individual node and then a slug. Next, we're going to want to pass in what is a component. So we're going to say component. And this is going to be equal to a path of a file. So let's actually check this out. If we look into here and we look at layouts or posts or any of this stuff, what exactly are we looking for? We're looking for what could be used as a template. Okay. Well, for this video, honestly, it doesn't much matter. We're not going to be running a query anyways. But what we want to say is path.resolve. And then inside of this resolve, we're going to give this a location to a file. We're going to say // and we're going to look inside the source folder. Then we're going to look inside of the pages and we're going to say, hey, just use right now, we're going to use page-2.js, okay? This is going to change very soon here, okay? But right now, every single page that we're going to get is going to be on a path of the node slug, and it's going to use page2.js. So hopefully when this loads up, we should get a whole bunch of extra page2.js's whenever we get to that page. And on the same level as our result, we're simply just going to want to resolve, okay? So check it out. Let's save this. Let's save this and let's see if this is working for us. Now, one last thing is that we used path and we used path.resolve, but path doesn't come in here by default. So we need to import path using the node require syntax. So we can say const path is equal to require and then path. Okay. So one interesting thing that's going on here is that to take changes into effect in our Gatsby node file, we have to rebuild the application. So let's go ahead and head to our command line and stop our process. And now let's go ahead and rerun this as Gatsby develop. And we're going to watch as hopefully this thing builds. Once we get to the step where it's creating pages, we're going to know if everything worked okay or not, because if it didn't, we're going to get a bunch of errors and the chances are it's going to fail out. So right now that says creating pages or create pages is the sort of crucial step in this whole process. I also should mention, don't be surprised if this takes just a little bit of time. This is the first time it runs. It could take a minute. Okay, and if yours is hanging here like mine, chances are you have the same issue I do. Let's actually come back to here. And pardon my apologies here. I looked like I did my .then on the, let's see, the return new promise. What I wanted to do was .then on the GraphQL query itself. My apologies there. So again, line 20, .then. If yours was just hanging and never going, chances are your promise was not resolving. Now we just need an extra set of brackets here at the bottom, and then once we save this, this should be all good. So this is what the last few lines of code. Again, check your code against mine. This big old thing can be a little confusing. You want to make sure it looks just like this for this thing to work. Let me stop this create pages, which is probably stuck in an infinite loop here, and rerun Gatsby develop. Okay, and check it out. We now have what seems to be our Gatsby up and running. So if we head back to our site, we should be able to do something where we actually head to a slug. Now, if you remember or you currently had your other site running, don't worry if you don't. If we go to any of our pages, let's go ahead and just grab one of the pages slugs. For instance, we have sample page here. So let's go ahead and have the Gatsby / sample page, and what we should see is hi from the second page. Now, I know this is working because if I were to change this to pages with a Z, you're going to see we get a 404. So it definitively created a page using the sample page. Now, what we're going to be doing in the next video is we're going to be passing along the slug, and we're going to be passing that into the create page. Into that page, we'll actually have a new page for that, but into that page, we're going to then run a GraphQL query, which is going to grab the whole rest of our data that we need for our post or in our page, such as the body text and all that good stuff. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Again, if you are having issues, this file is complex and you're not seeing our slug that is working at a / the page, go ahead and confirm with your code and my code is looking the exact same because it needs to look very, very similar or very, very the exact same as this to be working. Okay, remember the what we did in this is we ran this export create pages, which is the Gatsby API, and we're running a GraphQL query to grab all of our pages. Then when all of our pages come in, we're going to make sure they actually came in, and with those pages, we're going to run a for loop and create a page based on each of those pages where the path for that page is equal to a node.slug. So, okay, we've created pages that are statically generated from our WordPress API. If you wanted to do the same thing with posts, you would just change this .page query to be a .posts query. I believe you'd want to check the graphical interface, but it's going to be very, 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 very similar. Okay, so as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.